Well, I feel very fortunate that we are joined here today by the maker of the fabulous film SULAM, translated as the latter, Noam Argov. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Very kind of you to spend this time with us. Everybody's just seen the shorts and seen your film in particular. We all love it. I know I do. It's the second time I've gotten to program it. I just know that it's special to me. And one of the things I love is that you create something small in which the emotional stakes still feel incredibly high. Um, I'm curious because obviously there's more than a whiff of autobiography here. Uh, Looking back, how do you feel about your teenage relationship with your mother now?
I think like part of the reason I made the film was because memory is so funny that way. Like as you become an adult or go through different things, your interpretation of your memories sometimes changes. And I feel like that's what happened to me and kind of why I made this film, because as I've become an adult and I don't have kids, but like have started thinking about kids, I have so much more empathy for my mom and really like started thinking about how hard it was for her, and like found myself focusing more and empathizing more with like the shame that she must have felt, like around having to rely on your daughter for so many different things, and like that sort of eclipsing my previous interpretation of the relationship, which was really just self-centered about the shame that I felt around her, and like starting as an adult to really think about, well, what did that look like for her and how hard it must have been. And that tension between wanting to be independent and wanting to showcase yourself as like the authority figure in the household, but also being like in this kind of like codependent dynamic with your kid, and how hard that is. So that's, I think my like interpretation of the memories of our relationship has really like shifted over the years.
I totally hear you believe that, and I think that's just a part of the process of aging as you go. Like, oh, I mean, that was different than I interpreted at the time. But that's your mom's side, So you recognize the shame she might have felt. Is there also guilt that you carry about who you were then?
I think so. I mean, the whole thing, the story of it wasn't of the film wasn't exactly this kind of scenario, but there was a situation where I was with my mom in a store and she was trying, and it was a couple of times, and I literally ran away from her when she needed my help. Like I physically ran away. And I used to tell this story to my kind of like immigrant friends, is like, I can't, just sort of like a one of those funny anecdotes of like, can you believe that we did stuff like this with our parents? And yeah, I think there's a lot of like guilt there around like yeah, I was like 13. Like I can't believe I physically ran away from her when she needed something. And like imagining the reverse, like can you imagine a parent just like ditching their child, like good luck. And
Oh, I
so
thought about it.
yeah, right. So yeah, so I think there's like a lot of guilt there, and a lot of like self-reflection that also happened throughout the filmmaking process. And just like, I think even just making the film and kind of putting myself in the different characters' shoes back and forth gave me a lot of like empathy for my younger self and for my mom. And so it was kind of this like very difficult but healing, like self-reflexive filmmaking process.
I think that's one of the beauties of the short. I mean, everything rings true to me, but that ending is really potent in my mind because it's not Hollywood where it's they're just like holding hands and singing together and hands out the windows of the car, having a great moment. It's a momentary reprieve and a moment seemingly of understanding and compassion. Um, and I'm just sort of curious if you have a greater compassion overall for both of you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that moment for me is also like this understanding that you specifically have. I think every family dynamic has it, but specifically, when you're immigrants and you don't have anyone else in the country, you don't have the option of being mad at each other for very long because you're all the other person has. And so that's what that moment means to me and why it's so important. And it doesn't mean, like, to your point, let's sing Kumbaya as we drive to school, but it's sort of this understanding of like, okay, we have to move forward and forgive each other, or start to, because we rely on each other, and this is what it is, and we're family. And so yeah, I think I have a lot of like, I have a lot of compassion also, because my mom was usually, if we were in an argument or something, she did always kind of like, she was the adult, and she did kind of like extend that out to me as like, let's move forward. And I have so much compassion and like pride in her in that, because it shows such a lack of ego to kind of be able to say like, come on, like I still love you, even though I don't always know how to express it. Let's just like move on.
Well, she did that, and clearly you're doing some of that through making art. And I spoke with our mutual friend Abigail Zealy Best before talking to you, and she referred to you as one of the loveliest humans in the world, which is high praise from another lovely human. Uh, I'm curious if, I'm sure that's at your core. I'm not trying to take away from that, but I'm curious. Like, you've done work with National Geographic and documentary style work. Do you feel like your empathy or your compassion evolved by doing documentary work before doing this?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I'm sure it did. And some of the stuff I was doing was really hard. I mean, I think all documentaries, even if they are sports documentaries, they're really, really emotionally um draining in a way, and enriching, but like it's really hard on you emotionally as a filmmaker, because you're embedding yourself in people's lives. And I think that's a lot of like where that empathy for every single character comes from, at least for me as a director now in narrative, where like I had empathy for the shop owner, like for the Ace Hardware worker, like I had empathy for the blonde woman who's like was in the middle of a conversation. Like I really do. And I think that partly comes from like documentary, where you're just looking for the truth, like emotional truth. And like part of that is embedding yourself with different people and really watching them go through hard things and live their lives. um and they'll forget about the camera after a while, and they're so authentically themselves with you if you're doing it right. And so I think I definitely like to bring some of that into the shooting style, but also into how I think about every character, and even the smallest characters, I think about them very deeply, and I try to like understand where they're coming from.
It's amazing because it certainly shows through in the work. I'm curious. You had been working independently making film, and then you decided to go to Tisch. And what do you think you gained from that educational experience?
So much. I mean, I had never directed narrative before Tish, so like I'd never worked with actors or anything. And I think coming from documentary, I had this like fear that I didn't know how to do it. And certainly like taking classes with like Abigail, like where we had to act, or we started working on directing actors, I think I learned so much of those skills from there, and just being in like an environment with other directors in this sort of like almost boot camp environment, where it's like you make a film and then it gets critiqued, and then you make another film and it get, and I think it was really interesting because I'd been doing it professionally before, to almost step out of that. And I think I'm less I don't know. I'm still like, like every director, like in my head and scared and want people to like the movie. But I think um by being in an educational environment where like failing happens so often, like it happens weekly, and you're presenting your work in a public forum weekly, it sort of like puts you back into the act of just making things, and out of your head about like career success a little bit and that kind of thing. So I think that's been really nice to now coming back, now that I'm finishing Tish, coming back to a professional environment, to have that with me of like, if I can just enjoy the making of it, I'm gonna be okay. And if one's bad, I'll make another one, you know?
I think that's fantastic advice. You have to have that. You have to like it while you're doing it, certainly. I
Yeah.
want to go back to something you said though, because I really love the idea about emotional truth and finding it for every character. And it would seem to me that in documentary, that's more a matter of observation. When you're making a short narrative, though, are you going in with an idea of what the emotional truth is, or are you trying to discover something in the process of scripting or shooting?
I think for me, it's definitely more discovery. Like all of the films that I am interested in making, and I know it's different for different filmmakers, but for me personally, like I want to make a film about something I don't have the answer to. And I think that comes a bit from documentary too. Like some documentaries are definitely more like advocacy oriented, but I've always been interested in the ones where things are complicated and there aren't like clear good guys or bad guys, or characters are complicated and they contradict themselves and do things that aren't always in their own interests. And that's interesting to me in narrative as well. And so I think like even going into Sulam, I didn't necessarily have a sense of this is what I want to say, or like this is who's right. And I think that's what I enjoy about making it. And that's the discovery for me. Of answering those questions for myself, or ending up with more questions than answers. But hopefully the film itself is that like discovery journey, even for the audience, and they can generate their own thoughts and feelings about it. But that's like my favorite thing about the process. Like I always go in with a question, and the film is an exploration of that question more than anything else.
Just to be very literal about it, do you remember the question you went into Sulam with?
Let me think. I remember thinking, I don't remember an exact question. I'll try and think back. I remember thinking like my North Star was that I wanted to make a movie where other like immigrants like other immigrant kids could see it and like really relate to it. And what's been really nice is as the film is screened, people with just family members relate to it. So that's nice too. Um,
Oh,
but
I ran too.
yeah. I think anyone with a parent or who is a parent relates to it, which is really nice. I think my central question was, yeah, like why did I run away? I think was kind of an interesting question. Like, what was the emotional feeling that led me to run away? And 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 why did that situation even come about? Like why was my mom relying on me so much? Like what were the social dynamics between us? And and what did that mean for our relationship? And again, like they're like really deep questions, which like I don't even have the answers to them yet, but I think the film is like an emotional exploration of those questions, and you can feel some of the answers hopefully by the end of it.
And that's more than enough for a short. I mean, I'd take that even from a feature, but like just having an emotion to explore and sort of sit with as an audience is a wonderful treat in my mind. I just, pardon me for being, again, very specific about this, but I love that you were even thinking about like the emotional truth for the Ace Hardware sales person and the other woman just apparently wanted to get paint advice or something. Uh, how how do you find their emotional truths? Is that like working with the actors in that moment, discovering something? And can you reference that specifically for either of those actors?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and so to go back to what we were talking about earlier, in part of that kind of like exploration, question answering process that I do, the actors are so involved in that, um, for me too, because they bring their own background, interpretation, memories, truth, and I'm so open to that coming in. So it was very interesting with like to talk about the kind of main two characters first. Moore, who plays the mother, and Oria, who plays the daughter, they brought in their own experiences, and like Moore in a lot of ways was channeling experiences with her mom, and decided she wanted to try to like embody her mom in the role. And so it was so interesting, and so it changed. Like it didn't, in the end, like the film is not necessarily my relationship with my mom, it's like what the actors are bringing to it from there. I'm trying to remember I mean, it's pretty easy because we're, in terms of like these other side characters, because we're so multifaceted, like having you ever been in the middle of a conversation and someone interrupts you? It's so
Daily.
you know, or I think it's just everyone, it's very directory, I guess, in that way, but it's like everyone having their like objective, like this woman needs to get her vacuum cleaner, or no, she's buying a generator. It was a generator because we're in Florida. But she's trying to get a generator, and like her husband's texting her, and like, she's got her own thing. Maybe her husband sent her and she wants to show him that she can buy the generator, even though he thinks she's not going to buy the right one, and so she's got her whole thing going. And then this annoying woman interrupts her, and so I think it's just, but yeah, we're a lot of working with the actors for them to kind of bring whatever their own background and experiences and make it their own. That's like, I love that about the job. That's the fun. That's the fun.
It's amazing. So is that a table read or a rehearsal?
Rehearsal.
Rehearsal.
Like that line where she says, where the blonde woman says, it's a little rude, but okay. That wasn't scripted. That we found that in rehearsal, the actor gave that to me in the rehearsal, and I was like, I love this, let's put it in. Because it's like, it's a line that applies to everyone in the scene. It's like everyone in the scene feels that in their own way. And so it's a great line, right? And so I was like, that's going in, brilliant, but yeah, I love to find stuff in rehearsal, and I'll pull it in.
Awesome. It's a very open and caring process to like trust your artist collaboratively like that. How do you see, since you've done documentary and now you've gone to Tisch and you've got the fiction down, where do you see yourself moving forward?
Good question. I have to make another short for Tisch. I have to make my thesis. And so I'm shooting that in July, and then graduate in December. And then I've got my first feature, a couple drafts in. So hopefully by like end of next year, we can start shopping it around and trying to make it happen. But yeah, I want to make a feature next. I'm ready, I think.
and and will family feature in any of this?
In a way, the feature is a very different tone than this short. It's about something completely different. It's a bit comedic. But there's a mother-daughter relationship in it. So we're gonna keep mining that until we've figured it out.
This is either very cheap or very expensive therapy, depending on how you look at it.
I know. My mom loves the movie, by the way. People always ask me that. She's so proud. And so she's like, I don't care. Great. Make another one.
So, spoken like a true Israeli. Make another. Go ahead. Since you mentioned that, does she remember? Not because it wasn't exactly that story, but does she remember those moments of you running away the same way you do? Are your memories simpatico?
No, my mom is, to her credit, my parents both had really hard lives, and like I grew up without a lot of money after we immigrated and stuff. And they had hard lives before we moved. And so I think my mom, especially, to her credit, is so practical and so like forward looking, and she just like doesn't remember anything. She's like, oh, I don't think that happened. Like, and I'm like, it did. But she like she just moves on from stuff. I think and I think that's one of her really good qualities. And so yeah, I think I remember things a lot more painfully than she does. She's like very forward looking.
But that's why you're making art.
Yeah, exactly. And she
those of us,
studied accounting, so
those of us with long memories make art instead.
unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't think, unfortunately, I think we're quite fortunate that you are making films and that you have made Sulam. I think it speaks to everybody, whether you're an immigrant or not. Just anybody who's gone through that parent-child relationship can probably see some of themselves in it. I really thank you so much for capturing the guilt and the shame in those relationships as artfully as you have. And frankly, even though it's dramatic and it's serious, there is hope in that, and there's a great deal of passion and love that clearly emanates from you as well. So thank you, Noam Argov.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
the movie, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.